this is my story. In 2000, I started at Gardine School, the school that my father taught science at, and was to become one of the best places I'd ever been to, eventually, after 3 hard years, or so I thought. So I started year 7 and I was happy and just excited about being in secondary school, and glad that I had my dad there every day, in case anything went wrong. I could go to him, or he could be taught and informed, and then things could be sorted out, both at home and at school. Well, but a group of boys in my form, whose names were Adil, Jelani, Terry Monk, Alex Dixon, Mutsreen Ahmed, and Danny Thompson, thought that because my dad was a teacher in the school, that I'd be treated differently to the rest of them, that I'd be given special consideration for exams and for my homework and things like that. But the truth is I wasn't. I was exactly the same as them. And it makes me sick now to think that I let them get the better of me 3 whole years, or 2.5 years, because at the end of year 9, or halfway through year 9, I decided that enough was enough and I had to tell somebody. So I went to the only person I knew who could help me, and that was the student welfare officer in my school, who also happened to be becoming my form tutor, taking over from my current form tutor, who, bless him, tried but couldn't really do anything to help me, because he hadn't experience of bullying, really. He didn't know how to handle it, and he didn't know whether half the things I said about those boys were true or not, because it had gone on for so long. And so Mr. Jackson helped me with that, and he got those boys in one of my maths lessons to come up to me and apologise. Some of them, yeah, they weren't in lessons because they used to kick around the corridors and be a pain in the butt for some of the teachers. But even those boys decided that, hang on a second, what we're doing here is wrong. She's not anything different to us anyway. Yeah, her dad works in the school, yeah, she's got curly hair, yeah, she's smaller than us, and she looks weaker than us. But for those reasons, we should be protecting her, not turning against her. So in the end, they became some of my buddies from school. Yeah, I wasn't close to them, but I knew that I had them there in case I needed them. And when it got to year 11 and Kaylee Beck started on me, all I had to do was say something in form time, and one of them would leap to my defence about what he'd seen in the lesson if he'd been in the lesson with the two of us. And Danny Thompson happened to be in my maths lessons quite a lot, and he got to witness Kaylee kicking the back of my chair, throwing balls of paper at my head, trying to distract me from what Mr. Blair was saying at the front of the room, when I was desperately trying to learn a subject that doesn't come naturally to me anyway. I struggled with all the way through primary and secondary school. Maths never came easy to me, and I admit that now because it's now a struggle for me to even remember half the stuff I learned in secondary school in my maths lessons, because I haven't had to use it in all the years since I've been out of school. Not really, so I now struggle with it. But I was amazed that this boy that had decided I was something, a piece of dirt under his shoe or something, in year 7, 8 and 9, then realised, hang on a second, she's no different from me. I'm not going to stand by and watch her suffer. So he used to shout from across the room for Kane to stop kicking the back of my chair or stop throwing balls of paper at my head. And he was just so defensive of me. And I thought it was because he fancied me, but it turned out that wasn't the reason at all. It was because he fancied one of my best friends, as it happens, who he's now married to. And she couldn't be happier. But Yeah, she's considerably younger than him and she's at university, but that's not the point. I guess what I'm trying to say is bullying happens a lot, and most times it happens, teachers are powerless to help. They can't do much. If it happens in the corridors between lessons, the lunch times, break times, after school, that's the times when they're unable to help because they're not responsible for you at those times. They're only responsible when you're actually in a classroom learning. You're in a lesson. That's when they're solely responsible, and that's when they have control over what is said and done to each other. What you do to each other. I guess those boys finally learned that just because my dad was a teacher in school didn't mean I was going to be given special consideration for things. Because to me, Mr. Shilk was another member of staff. Throughout the school day, it wasn't my dad. He was another member of staff. From 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he was just another teacher. And I treated him as one, and I respected him in the same way I respected all the teachers. Yeah, I gave him the occasional smile or the occasional cheeky wink in the corridor, but apart from that, nothing really to make it obvious he was my dad. Apart from calling him dad in one of my geography lessons in year 11, but that was a mistake, because I wasn't expecting to have him as a cover teacher at that point. I never took GCSE geography because I found the workload too stressful. Yeah, I did the classroom work and I got a lot of good marks for my class essays and things like that. But the coursework for my GCSE was too much for me, so I dropped it at the time of the exam. I didn't actually take the papers. But in all my other GCSEs, I did pretty well, and yeah, I got a bunch of C's, a couple of D's, and one E, and one F. The F was in religious study, which, as you probably all well know, isn't a subject that most kids in secondary school want to study, but it has to be done, and it does get tedious after a while. But getting upset and keeping it bottled up inside is not the answer. You have to tell people what's going on. And it took me a lot of courage to tell anyone that I was being bullied. And what those boys were doing to me. But just the sheer fact that my tutor managed to get them to come up to me in a maths lesson and say they were sorry to my face made me feel like I can do this. I can defend myself against these kids. Because that's all they were. They were kids like me, who had been bullied and ridiculed and damaged previously, and they thought that their answer was to bully someone else, inflict the pain they suffered at the hands of another bully onto someone who was sorry, that was a friend of mine signing into Facebook, who was exactly the same. And I got picked on in primary school by boys again who thought I was a weakling just because I couldn't run very fast and I couldn't run very far and I didn't like sports and I wasn't a fan of running games, things like that. I liked to sit in the corner of the playground reading a book, and they thought that was really nerdy and only losers did that, and that I should be running around screaming with the rest of them. But I wasn't like that. I've always been one that likes to sit on their own and read. I love my books, as you can probably tell by all the posters and stuff around me. I love to pretend that I live in a different world to the real one. In my world, bullying doesn't exist. And depression and anxiety don't really show themselves very often. Well, they do, but that's a different story. And getting back to my time at Vardine, in year 10, my life drastically improved, and I thought, oh, this is great, this is what it should have been like for me all the way through. Sorry, there's someone else on Facebook. What are you people like? Anyway, I thought that, oh, this is what it's supposed to have been like all the way through, without the bullies and the abuse and name calling and all of that. But then I met Kaylee Beck, and it all started again. In my maths lesson, she would kick the back of my chair repeatedly, throw balls of paper at my hair, put pens at me, try and distract me, get me into trouble for turning around to her to shut up. So it's a bit of dirt that screen. Many things like that. And it just, I don't see the point in dwelling on it, because it was something that happened in my life. And I moved on from it through year 11. Got over it, thought, oh, I'll go to college and it'll be fine. I won't have to put up with this anymore. I'll see a new group of people, I'll make new friends, and I'll soon move on from what happened in school. How wrong I was. Some of the staff at Plumpton bullied me, made me feel small, like I couldn't do anything to do with the horses, like I wasn't strong enough, and that I wasn't making enough effort and things like this. And my tutor, Paul Thomas, was one of the staff that bullied me. He said I wasn't competent enough in my riding, and that I was on the course if I didn't know what my diagonals were. And I actually turned to him and I said, my riding instructor hasn't taught me about diagonals. She doesn't teach like that. We don't do that. We don't do those sort of things when we have lessons with her. And he said, well, you should, because it's part of the curriculum. You're meant to, when you're learning to ride, you're supposed to learn these things. She's obviously not a very good instructor. And from that point on, he put me off wanting to ride ever again, because I thought I wasn't good enough. And I started to doubt myself about, am I really that gifted with horses? Do I really have an empathy with them? But now I'm back with them, and just a change in me from the first day I went back onto that yard and sat back on a horse has been immense. I could not live without them now. They're part of me, they're part of who I am. And if I lost my connection with horses, it would break my heart. Because 3 greys has made a hell of a difference to someone who thought that the only answer was suicide. Anyway, I'll have another video about that. That'll be in part 2.